This is a re-recording of my talk, Solarpunk Means Dreaming Green. I spoke about the history and future of solarpunk at Human Entities Conference in Lisbon on Wednesday the 5th of June 2024, organised by CADA in partnership with the Lisbon Architecture Trienniale and the Faculty of Fine Arts, University of Lisbon. I'll put a link to the original recording of the talk below in case you're interested. It includes the lively audience Q&A, which I enjoyed very much. There's also a link to my blog, thejmo.net, where you can find all my other writing, talks and interviews about solarpunk that I've done over the last decade or so. Most of the other videos on this channel are the video versions of my weekly 301 second long podcast, Permanently Moved. So you can subscribe to that too if you want more of me. With all that said, let's begin. Solarpunk means dreaming green. I'm Jay Springett, a writer and strategist from London, and I'm a solarpunk. Some of you watching this may be new to solarpunk, hearing about it for the first time, while others may be here specifically because of the subject. But I'll assume you're all asking the same question of me. What is solarpunk? An idea that as of this month is just over 12 years old. I've been involved since its early days, and over the next 45 minutes or so, I'll share a little about its history and development. However, I can't definitively answer what solarpunk is, nor can I speak for other solarpunks. I can only tell you what solarpunk means to me. Solar punk, a combination of words that struck me like lightning when I first saw them on a mailing list in the early 2010s. It electrified others too, sparking conversations in chat rooms, in weird art and design conferences, and of course, on social media. After lots of conversation, I ended up getting involved alongside some of the people I'll mention in my talk today. Over the years, solarpunk has had many descriptions and identities, but this is in its nature. It's not an idea that can be pinned to a corkboard, labelled, or kept under glass. Instead, it's a kaleidoscopic patchwork of radical imagination. One new description of solarpunk does not replace the other. Instead, they coexist and continue along together in parallel, meaning different things for different people. Some see solarpunk as a near-future sci-fi genre, a green utopian aesthetic, or a rallying banner. It's all of this and more, a container for possibility, perhaps even a dream. In 2015, speculative fiction author Andrew Danner Hudson was asked what solarpunk was, and he replied, "I hesitate to define it and therefore limit it, for the thousands now exploring its possibilities." Despite being 12 years old, solarpunk is still a new idea, because people are constantly discovering it. The important question isn't what solarpunk is, but what solarpunk means to you. And if I may, I'd like to begin my talk with two quotes. The first is from Nigerian poet and politician Ami Césaire, quoted by Isaiah Johnson in their 2020 essay, Solarpunk and the Value of Utopia. A civilization that proves incapable of solving the problems it creates is a decadent one. A civilization that chooses to close its eyes to the most crucial problems is a stricken one. A civilization that uses its principles for trickery and deceit is a dying one. Johnson, in that essay, continues, "These words may as well been written specifically for the issue of climate change. Indeed, that they were written for colonialism serves to underscore the relationship between the two. Every moment that climate change is not fought with every available tool is a moment that we, namely those in the global north, are choosing convenience over justice. While there is no silver bullet to fight the growing nihilistic resignation of climate grief, there are good reasons to believe that solarpunk is an important part of the fight." The second is from Angela Davis. "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time." Act 1. The Broken Present. A foundational idea in solarpunk is the feeling that the present is broken. On the one hand, the present moment feels too slow, full of inertia, unable to address any of the fast-moving crises that we face. On the other, it feels too fast. Culture and technology is changing rapidly. Everything is in crisis. In the early 2010s, the broken present suggested a broken future too. The question was why? Why are the visions of the future that we share in our collective imagination not our own, but someone else's? For example, the recent video game Cyberpunk 2077 is selling us the same idea of the future that's been around for 40 years. In 2014, Mark Fisher wrote in Ghost of My Life, "It doesn't feel like the future." Or alternatively, it doesn't feel as if the 21st century has started yet. We remain trapped in the 20th century. The slow cancellation of the future has been accompanied by a deflation of expectations. It was around that time that Fisher wrote these words that I joined solarpunks.net on Tumblr as an admin with others who were also envisioning new futures in new ways. 2 years earlier, Adam Flynn had written the first ever essay on solarpunk in English, titled On the Need for New Futures. In it, he wrote, "We are starved for visions of the future that will sustain us and give us something to hope for. Ideas of life beyond the rusted chrome of yestermorrow." A sentiment echoing Fisher's. The defining media form in the age of social media is the looping GIF, a perfect metaphor for our culture right now, endlessly repeating the same patterns, ideas, and trends. In an era of constant content, there's a strange comfort in familiar loops. Music, art, fashion, cinema, and stories recycle the past, going round and round because the present feels broken. According to filmstories.com, there are currently 136 reboots, remakes, and sequels in various phases of production. Due to copyright, our culture treats narratives, myth, and our shared social imagination as a commodity. The stories that influence and nourish our imaginations are bought and sold. Contemporary mass culture currently runs on what I call cultural grammars, essentially shared expectations. New cultural products have to refer to older grammars from a time when everyone shared them, back when their business model still worked, before the internet, basically. Disney recently spent $200 million on a film based on a theme park ride, and the biggest film of last year was based on a toy released in the 1950s. This movie epitomizes a phenomenon I call cultural fracking, the process of extracting new value out of sedimentary layers of meaning that comprise mass culture from the past. In order to profitably mine the stable expectations of the wider cultural imagination, mainstream cultural owners have to continually loop back and frack the past to create new material in the future present. It's not that all the reboots, remakes, and nostalgic mashups like Ready Player One are unoriginal, it's just the logic of media produced under narrative monopoly. Laura Beeston, lead author of last year's Canada Media Fund Futures Report on cultural fracking, extended the concept, saying, "Much like the act of fracking itself, blasting every rock down to its last drop tends to contaminate the water supply and wipe entire ecosystems out. We have work to do, not just in our ecologically denuded landscapes, but in our imaginations too." Solarpunk seeks to repair and remediate our damaged collective imagination in a DIY way from the ground up. We must create the conditions for a blooming, like wildflowers after rain. Over the last decade, solarpunk has felt like a slow-motion uncorking of the collective imagination. It's not just a sci-fi genre, but a movement for political imagination. A genre explores ideas through motifs and themes. A movement provokes change through strategy and action. I love the former, but we need the latter. Perhaps solarpunk can do both. The world of solarpunk, no matter how hard we dream, is always this world, the here, the now, and the very soon. Let's quickly take a tour through the kinds of visions of the future we're being sold in the cultural mainstream. There's 2001 space realism, seen in Ad Astra, Interstellar, or The Expanse. There's retro futures like Tomorrowland that borrow from the 1960s. Sometimes, like in the video game and TV show Fallout, there's the 1950s retro future mixed with the post-apocalyptic fears of the Cold War. Or straight-up post-apocalyptic movies, rebooted to reference ecological collapse instead of peak oil fears. And then, of course, there's Disney's MCU, or Star Wars. Filled with characters created more than half a century ago, it's undeniable that Disney is fracking every last penny from its $4.2 billion purchase of the commodity known as Marvel. Consider the types of stories they are selling. In a time of urgent collective action needed on climate change, biosphere collapse, mass immigration, and other global scale challenges, we are getting narratives of individual superheroes or saviors. Stories about figures that are above or beyond humanity coming to save the day. In the real world, of course, no one is coming to save us. This has been evident for a long time. Alan Moore said as much in an interview back in 2014 that, to his mind, this embracing of what were unambiguously children's characters in their mid-20th century inception seems to indicate a retreat from the admittedly overwhelming complexities of modern existence. Solarpunk, then, is a collective attempt to think beyond the cultural condition that Fisher diagnosed as capitalist realism. The widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. Late capitalism defutures our imaginations. It closes down possibility. There can be nothing beyond the present condition. I personally believe this process of defuturing has contributed greatly to the meaning crisis we now find ourselves in. A decade ago, imagining a better world felt punk as hell, and it still does. For most of my adult life, sci-fi has been about the end of the world, floods, freezes, aliens, and movie stars going to space to stop asteroids. But there are no big budget movies about planting a garden or stopping climate change. I'm a solarpunk because the only other options are denial or despair. Act 2. Defining solarpunk. Solarpunk emerged on social networks and found its cultural home there. First on Tumblr, then spreading to Reddit, Mastodon, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, etc. Solarpunk isn't one thing, one single idea. It's a host of separate communities working, collaborating, making art, and inspiring each other. It's noisy and vibrant. The first solarpunk anthology, Ecological and Fantastical Stories in a Sustainable World, was published in Brazilian Portuguese in 2012. And for a long time, the existence of this book was the only link between the English-speaking solarpunks and Brazilian ones. A situation that has thankfully changed as the movement has become more global. The anthology was translated into English in 2018 after a successful community Kickstarter by World Weavers Press. This book was part of a series, followed by Atempunk and Dieselpunk. By their names alone, these punks reserved a place alongside other punk genres. Most people, upon encountering solarpunk, immediately compare it to its grandfather, cyberpunk. In 2014, the EIA, CIA, and World Bank published a graph on the falling cost of solar energy titled Welcome to the Terror Dome. But solarpunks see no terror in this future. If cyberpunk of the 1980s was about exploring the societal impact of the semiconductor technology, like transistors and integrated circuits, then solarpunk is somewhere tied to the technological shift towards another semiconductor technology, the photovoltaic circuit. An attempt to imagine what impacts renewables might have on social justice and the causes of economic liberation. Solarpunk contrasts the popular grim futures of cyberpunk with a bright viridian green optimism, a response to Sesman and Boyer's call to map out other ways of being, behaving, and belonging in relation to energy in order to reimagine modernity in the face of global warming. In solarpunk, energy is explicitly political, and the process that renewables enable, the transmutation of wind, water, and solar into energy, may lead to new human lifeways. The solar in solarpunk can refer to solar power, of course, but also capital P power. Solarpunk sees infrastructure as a site of potential resilience. In 2014, the late mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, Chokwe Lumumba, said that dealing with infrastructure is a protection against being robbed of one's self-determination. Rhys Williams, writing on Solarpunk in the LARB, said it's possible that a shift to renewables will spell the end of capitalism, that alternative forms of energy are not compatible with capital's grail of profit and growth. But where there's a capitalist will, there's usually a capitalist way. The necessity of energy transition provides us with a historical moment of crisis in which opposing ideologies are wrestling over the future, not only of energy, but of society. The point is less whether renewable energy automatically equals a fairer society, but more that the massive infrastructural changes ahead provide leverage to institute something better. This is where Solarpunk steps in, the dream of something better for the world. It acts as a container for innovative ideas, open for anyone to place their own ideas inside of. Not just any container, but inspired by Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction. The carrier bag, or container, she thought, was the earliest human tool, a metaphor for symbolizing stories that collect and contain a diversity of experiences, voices, and perspectives. Inside Solarpunk's container is a polyphonic future texture from which new ideas can emerge. Due to the nature of the feed, Solarpunk ideas are always in juxtaposition. Anyone can post their Solarpunk idea online using the hashtag, but once you hit send, you have to click on it. Maybe you see an off-grid home heated by a lean-to greenhouse, a repurposed satellite dish turned into low-tech solar oven, a post about streetscaping and water harvesting in dryland regions, alongside architectural manuals about sprawl repair or retro suburbia. Maybe someone has published a story, or a solarpunk has started a community seed library in their village's disused phone box. Perhaps there's a community of anarchist solarpunk hackers living aboard abandoned boats. Or it's an article about solar e-bikes. At its core, solarpunk is about relating ideas to one another, a process of conceptual bricolage. And this bricolage makes solarpunk a memetic engine. You place an idea into its container and other ideas come out. Yet for many people, people who haven't clicked on the solarpunk hashtag and gone deep, it seems shorthand for an aesthetic. Many teenagers use aesthetic as an all-purpose adjective. That's so aesthetic, a shorthand for that's so aesthetically pleasing to me. But in a broader internet parlance, it now means a collection of signifiers, or precisely, a vibe. Solarpunk isn't about what the future looks like, but what it might feel like when we get there. Nearly 40 years after its inception, Cyberpunk 2 has a vibe. Heavy rain and harsh neon, cool robot limbs and VR goggles. The genre's big symbols like cyberspace, the metaverse and AI have transcended their role as symbolic warnings and become hyperstitional realities. But what was Cyberpunk originally about? It was about the way that technology shoves human life into ever greater levels of abstraction, like cyberspace. It was about the rise of corporate power, ubiquitous computation, and greed. It was about the politics of the 1980s, urban decay and globalization, the rise of zero-tolerance policing, anxieties around healthcare, and the psychological toll of imminent nuclear annihilation. And of course, the rise of the microchip and computers. Some of this came true, but some things, in actuality, are far worse. In 2014, a post about solarpunk by Miss Olivia Louise on Tumblr went viral. Natural colours, Art Nouveau, handcrafted wares, tailors and dressmakers, streetcars, airships, stained glass windows, solar panels, education in tech and food growing, solar rooftops and roadways, communal greenhouses, renewable energy powered Art Nouveau styled tech life. I should add that the presence of Art Nouveau doesn't necessarily make something solarpunk or vice versa. Solarpunk's aesthetics arise from praxis. A solarpunk future looks a certain way because of the actions we take, the things we need to do en route to a better world. None of the images of solar cookers, e-bikes or greenhouses I showed have anything to do with Art Nouveau. And solarpunk will not and cannot mean one thing, no matter how memeified it becomes. It is forever open for adoption and appropriation. It must always spawn new worlds and new futures. Like the world around us, solarpunk is always in the process of renewal. Solarpunk is about the here and now. It's a texture made up of existing elements projected forwards. What will it be like when there's a food forest on every street, an opera in every park, a water filter in and a solar panel on every home? You put your ideas in the solarpunk container and they mix with others. The more ideas you contribute, the more you get back. This is why solarpunk is a memetic engine. What do you want solarpunk to be? Act 3. A Practical Utopianism. I would like you to think of solarpunk as a grand dress rehearsal. Think about everything involved in putting on a play. The writer, director, costumers, lighting team, sound team, stagehand, actors, sets, set builders, props, script, and stage. It's a collective group effort. Solarpunk as a dress rehearsal suggests it's our last chance to get things wrong, but also our first glimpse of what the world might become if we get it right. In 2016, solarpunkanarchist.com described solarpunk as a practical utopianism, an eco-futurist movement which tries to think our way out of catastrophe by imagining a future most people would actually like to live in, instead of ones that we should be trying to avoid. It's an attempt to imagine solutions to live comfortably in the world without fossil fuels, to equitably manage scarcity and share abundance, to be kinder to each other and the planet that we share. The tagline on solarpunks.net for the last decade has been, "It is at once a vision of the future, a thoughtful provocation, and an achievable lifestyle." It seeks to answer and embody the question, what does a solarpunk civilization look like and how do we get there? Better put, solarpunk is about being en route to a better world, which I think you'll agree feels as countercultural and punk as you can get today. And people are doing the work. The anarcho art collective Commando Jungdesil uses solarpunk and citizen sci-fi to inspire communities to clear up unloved spaces and paint murals. Regenerative permaculture farmers proudly declare themselves solarpunks, doing the hard work of land restoration and the humble work of feeding their communities. Architect Vincent Kalber, a leader in biomimicry and climate-responsive design, is a man who designs and builds real buildings that actually exist like this from wood. He recently gave a TED talk on his work and design philosophy, and he ended it with this call. Long live the Solarpunk movement. Make this movement your revolution. Act 4. The Speculative Present. The present might feel broken, but this crisis presents us with opportunity. Frederick Jameson observed in 1982 that the role of science fiction was not to imagine the future so much as to defamiliarize and restructure our experience of our own present, and to do so in specific ways. Since its inception, Solarpunk has provided and perhaps permission for those wishing to think beyond the defuturing tendencies of capitalist realism and our cultural predicament. During the pandemic, writer and academic Sijia Hartman said that so much of the work of oppression is about policing the imagination. In 2011, cyberpunk author Neil Stephenson proposed that fictional visions of the future act as hieroglyphs, simple, recognizable symbols whose significance everyone can agree upon. Stephenson later teamed up with Arizona State University to create Project Hieroglyph, an attempt to crowdsource ideas and symbols that might puncture the broken present. Contributing to the project in 2014, Adam Flynn wrote the important essay, Solarpunk, Notes Towards the Manifesto. He thought Solarpunk could be a big idea that does more than act as a symbol. We are trying to make Solarpunk a concept, an aesthetic, a design fiction movement, a setting for roleplay games, because we need banners to rally around, and there is power in forming subcultures around ideas. The aesthetic of Solarpunk might be part of this flag, but it isn't the whole of it. If you Google Solarpunk, what you'll find is something like this in the search results. Unfortunately, much of what Google presents as Solarpunk isn't. With few exceptions, it's mostly eco-modernist greenwashing. In a 2021 Vice Media interview, I said, if you're looking at an eco-future image and it doesn't have people in it, then it's not Solarpunk. Despite this statement being in the article, what image did they use to illustrate it? That's right, a horrendous destroy it all and build something completely different eco-modernist nightmare. Compare that image to this one by Jessica Pearlstein, inspired by the book The Fifth Sacred Thing by Starhawk. Which of these images would you rather live? This one? Or this one? Everything in this image is possible now. We only need to execute. Greenhouse domes and rooftop farms, pedestrianisation of major thoroughfares, herb gardens, wind turbines, and rooftop solar. As solarpunks, we shouldn't bemoan the current lack of these things around us, but encourage their arrival. This proactive mindset is crucial. In a 2010 speech, Atemporality for the Creative Artist, Bruce Sterling encouraged us to become multi-temporal rather than multicultural. It used to be a problem that historians could not divide themselves from the outlooks and interests of their own age. I think we're approaching a situation where the outlooks and interests of our own age make very little sense. The present we live in is a consequence of our past, and the future will be a product of our present. Flynn again, in 2012, one of the most curious facts about living as we do today is that our future does not, strictly speaking, exist. Our philosophy of history has more or less collapsed. We are confronted with a dizzying array of signals, strong and weak, fair and foul. Solarpunk can use this multi-temporality to its advantage. We have a chance to rewrite the history of the future. Speaking of writing, I often struggle to point people towards a single novel and say, that's Solarpunk. Instead, there are lots of Solarpunk anthologies. This isn't all of them, only the ones that I could fit on the slide. The story collection has emerged as Solarpunk's preferred literary form. Each book containing multiple voices and visions of the future, each story and viewpoint juxtaposed with one another. Each story adds to the texture, each book contributes to the vibe. Solarpunk is an exercise in collective world building, not a single shared world, but multiple worlds. As writer, researcher, and professional world builder Paul Graham Raven says, the way that you think about the worlds you build is reflected in the way you narrate them. So we need as many new worlds as we can get. At its best, Solarpunk tries to dislocate itself from the present, offering new experiences of the world. Imagine walking down the street, your mind buzzing with Solarpunk ideas, permacultural techniques, innovative urban planning. You begin to see possibility everywhere. For example, the underutilized scrubland behind the station could become a vibrant community garden or a venue for local events. The parched dead grass next to the supermarket could be transformed into a site for rewilding, full of life and potential. This is the adoption of the speculative present. Kerry Facer uses a similar term, the thick present, to describe this condition. Ideas of the future shape what is experienced in the present. The experience of the present shapes ideas about the past, and the reading of the past informs ideas of future possibility. In 2018, comics writer and author Warren Ellis introduced me to the term refuturing. Just as rewilding is to the landscape, refuturing to the imagination. The sense of creating new immediate futures and repopulating the future space was something entirely divorced from previous consensus futures. To refuture is to encourage and cultivate the qualities of futuring in the minds of people who encounter solarpunk. Creating speculative presence allows us to resist the defuturing processes of steady-state capitalist realism by generating new, plausible worlds today. Recognizing this unlocks a broader perspective. And it's working. Last year, US Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, during an Instagram livestream, was asked about her take on climate doom and doomerism. She replied that she believes not just in climate optimism, but specifically in solarpunk. For those of us who have been trying to make solarpunk a thing for a long time, this was pretty cool. There are important people out there watching, listening, and being inspired by our ideas. In his essay Ways of Telling Tomorrow, Raven argues for the utility of science fiction to reconcile historical trajectories with extrapolated trends, to act as a storehouse for tools and strategies for potential futures. Speculative presence and the futures that they may lead to provide a sandbox today where all of these ideas and solutions might be tested to destruction without consequence. We can rehearse our ideas about the future. It's becoming ever harder to think about the future at all beyond quarterly reports, yearly budgets, or 4 or 5 year parliamentary terms. We're stuck in a myopic window of time. But in the real world, away from high frequency ledger entries, it takes 100 to 120 years for an oak tree to grow from seed to full canopy height. 3 human generations. This is real growth. The ideas and gestures that we make today will grow over time. One of Solarpunk's maxims is to move quietly and plant things, to engage in activity in the margins. What gestures can we make together now, today, that might start small but grow into mighty oaks? We all know deep down that progress and development is not the same as growth. An integral thesis of Solarpunk is about decoupling the first from the second. More is not better. Yet there are enduring symbols of patience and long-term growth all around us. For instance, the King of Limbs in Britain is over 1,000 years old. It has been growing in place since before the Norman conquest. Millennia-long scales of engagement with the world are almost unimaginable compared to the 2-week agile sprints popular in the tech world. I'm not suggesting that we try to make stories and art that will last 1,000 years, but instead we should think hard about the messages we choose to send, person to person, into the future. And the clearest message is planting a tree. Because you can't move a tree once it's planted, only reject its message by cutting it down. We should, for a moment, talk about the weather. Days after Mexico elected a climate scientist as their president, Mexico City could potentially be running out of water in just 3 weeks' time. In 2018, Cape Town faced its own zero day, but narrowly escaped after imposing restrictions and halving its daily water usage by around 500 million litres. Their escape was aided by strong rains in the region, but it also caused flash flooding and much destruction. Last week, Delhi officials closed schools with immediate effect as temperatures reached as high as 50 degrees centigrade in the shade. A wet bulb temperature of 37.8 degrees C was recorded, the death line on the thermometer when the air is so hot and fully saturated with moisture that the body's ability to cool itself through sweating is impaired. Meanwhile, other storms hit other parts of the country. And strong winds flattened a giant billboard in Mumbai, killing 16 people and trapping dozens more. Most atolls will be uninhabitable by the mid-21st century. And a tornado recently ripped through Iowa, deleting wind turbines from the landscape as it blew past. There are at least 100 million climate refugees expected by 2050. And closer to home, here in Portugal, over the last 2 decades, the frequency of wildflowers, droughts, storms, floods, and extreme temperatures has only increased. Natural disasters have affected up to 166 million people and incurred damages of 10 billion euros. Some poor souls have had their homes burned down more than once. Welcome to disaster season. This is the heavy weather in the thick present. Solarpunk is the art we make for this occasion. It is the stage upon which all our new stories must unfold. When people speak of climate change, they usually show graphs like this. We live in a culture that prefers statistics to the complexities of real life. Yet models predicting 1.5 degrees warming reduce the crisis to nothing but numbers on a graph, obscuring and abstracting away the horrors and misery of the heavy weather. I've been an environmental activist for most of my life. I was planting trees and picking up litter in the 1990s. I have protested and put myself in danger. And like many people, I have been through a period of grief for the whole world. As the Dark Mountain Manifesto says, climate change brings home our ultimate powerlessness. But it was this grief that led me to Solarpunk, and the grief colours my involvement with it, how I talk about it and how I think about it. My friend Dougal Hine, Dark Mountain Manifesto co-author, recently wrote that often, when it comes to what to do about climate change, responsibility passes from scientists to the engineers and the economists. Artists are brought into projects about climate change. The assumption tends to be that they will make something that helps deliver the message, a poem, a play, a film, a pop song, that will wake people up to the depth of the trouble that we are in, that will stir people to action to bring about behaviour change. Solarpunk is an art about climate change. It's the art we make for it. The stories we tell about the future, the stories we tell others, and the ones we tell ourselves. Vanessa de Oliveira, in her book Hospicing Modernity, tells us that stories are not human-made tools of communication that aim to index the world into language or to word the world. Instead, stories are entities that visit and move things in the world in non-linear time. They are stories that world the world. There is so much good work happening to decolonize, recontextualize, and resituate history. Solarpunk tries to provide a space for indigenous sovereignties, reproductive justice, and radical queer politics. It recasts old ideas alongside contemporary ones, projecting their arrangement forward for better or worse. What new stories do you want to tell about the world? I'm conscious that I haven't answered the question, what is Solarpunk? But I have told you what I think it's for. Solarpunk is not a utopian idea of the future. We know disaster season is upon us, and we won't look away. Nor does Solarpunk have anything to do with its depressing cousin, born around the same time, the Anthropocene, so beloved of the art world. Solarpunk is a green dream, the performance of a dream that we can call the Anthropogreen. I once heard that the 19th century was the century of chemistry, the 20th the century of physics, and the 21st will be the century of biology and re-engagement with the living world. Monica Gagliano, to be honest a bit of a hero of mine, opened this series of talks on her work and research on plant cognition. This is part of the new story too. We are all, right now, here today, at the beginning of a new civilizational project. The beginning of a 1,000-year cleanup, an epoch defined by a different kind of human intervention upon the earth, a civilization shaped by small gestures and gardeners' hands, the coaxing of life from damaged soils. The Anthropogreen is at once a vision of the future, a thoughtful provocation, and achievable. With our punk attitudes and disrespect for authority and entrenched power systems, we can ignore critics who say combating climate change is unrealistic, unfeasible, or too expensive. Any dream of a better future is often dismissed as too utopian, too naive, or too radical. But as the UK's lead climate scientist Kevin Anderson recently said, there are no non-radical futures anymore. We will either make radical voluntary changes to decarbonise our systems, or be forced to accept the radical changes from climate change and ecosystem shifts. In our present, speculative or not, radical futures are going to become a reality either way. We only have 10 years to save the world, but it's going to take us 100 years to do it. The project of the Anthropogreen and the responses to climate and biodiversity loss are of course unique in every part of the world, but what we can say is that what we currently think of as the natural or wild will look very different in the future. One of the phrases that appears in the Solarpunk comic Natural Forces is, "We pass a curated landscape." I can think of no better term to describe the activity of the Anthropogreen. The idea of a curated landscape is much easier to speak about in countries like Portugal than in England. Here, millions of hours of collective labour over millennia have gone into building and shaping terraces on hillsides. The same level of human effort is needed once more, everywhere, all at once. And Solarpunk's current task is to inspire that work. When I was young, my mum would tell me to do my homework because if I didn't, I would end up good for nothing but digging ditches. The irony is that digging ditches is exactly what the world needs right now. Ditches are being dug in North Africa as part of the Great Green Wall, millions of miles of them. The Pani Foundation is coordinating the digging of ditches in India, transforming and rehydrating the landscape, lifting people out of poverty, and boosting quality of life. We need people stacking rocks high up in the mountains, creating check dams. Robots can't do this work, nor can AI. Rock walls and check dams need fingers and thumbs. These structures prevent flooding and hold water high in the landscape, reversing desertification over time. This works anywhere that it's hot and dry, or will be in the future. This is the Al Beda project in Saudi Arabia. It transformed the landscape. It just requires people. People out in the wild, planting trees, or skinning mimosa by hand, killing them slowly, protecting the landscape from future wildfires. A lot of money is being spent on thinking about the future of cities right now. But the future is full of people back in the villages, out in the countryside, doing things in the landscape despite the heavy weather. Architecture can refuture itself too. An idea from Solarpunk's Memetic container is that of spatial strategy. This is keyline design, a design process. It primarily addresses the movement of water across the landscape, and it defines the strategic placement of ponds and ditches, beneficial in both drought-prone areas as regions prone to flooding. It is a modular conceptual system. It allows for the integration of elements like tree planting along contour lines and the implementation of agroforestry. It works at various scales, from national landscapes, local parks to your own backyard. If there are any architects in the audience, the curated landscape of the Anthropogreen arises from this kind of praxis. The so-called developing nations can radically transform their landscapes. We in Europe can too. The Solarpunk near future may just be climate camps full of young, motivated people, working seasons in the hillsides during the day and partying every night Burning Man style. Solarpunk is a response to the broken present, a total rejection of the apocalypse. It is a concept, an idea, a container that's free for everyone to put ideas into. Each imaginary Solarpunk future, yours and mine, is a proposal for the kind of future we would like to live. A dress rehearsal for the Anthropogreen. We are all the audience, the writers, and its actors. And we dream of opening night. The science fiction author Madeline Ashby once said that we have to talk loudly and frequently and in detail about the future you want, because you can't manifest what you don't share. Rhys Williams describes Solarpunk as a kaleidoscopic manifesto, an argument in story and image, the song of a community both incoherent and coalescing, simultaneously committed and finding its feet. There's no guarantee that this will lead anywhere, but its stance makes up a positive force in the current struggle. Here's to the light. And finally, Arundhati Roy was recently asked what lies ahead. Reimagining the world, she said. Only that. Thanks. So that was my talk from Human Entities. If you've made it all the way to the deep end, then subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out my blog, and I'll put a link to my 2018 talk, A Grand Dress Rehearsal, which is the genesis for a lot of this talk's ideas. Cheers.